all these investors really have had their eye on Bitcoin for a while. The way I see MEV is, like there's not a ton of knowledge about it everywhere. It's not like you go MEV on Bitcoin and see the Ethereum equivalent. That's what makes it so exciting in a way. My mental, you know how you have the dark forest on Ethereum? Personally, I call it the dark swamp because it's even darker than the dark forest. You have some analogies to Ethereum MEV that you can see on Bitcoin, but I think there's also a lot of new behavior, and even new behavior that no one knows about, not even us.
Welcome back to Bitcoin Season 2. Bitcoin Season 2 is about new conversations with new people on the oldest blockchain, Bitcoin. Make sure to check out other Blockspace media content like the Gwart Show, the Mining Pod, the new Stock Show, Bitcoin Stock Show. Hit blockspace.media, the website, to see all those things and get on the newsletter list. So today I've got Devin from Rebar Labs. We met in Nashville, and Rebar is doing some very interesting stuff with MEV on Bitcoin. So we're going to talk here for a little while. Devin, welcome
Hello.
to Bitcoin Season 2.
Oh, hey, thank you for having me on.
Yeah. So tell me about where you fit into the Rebar team. You guys did a raise. Let's breeze through this really quick. What is Rebar in a few sentences?
Yeah, definitely. So Rebar is building infrastructure, doing products, we're doing research to explore MEV on Bitcoin and essentially build the things that need to be in place for when MEV emerges on Bitcoin. And we're beginning to see that happen now with all the programmability. It's coming to Bitcoin, all the exciting new things we're seeing on Twitter. So I'm really excited to be working with a team of really, really smart people. And I'm leading a lot of the communications, writing the blog posts, explaining what we're doing in simpler terms, and of course, hanging out on Twitter for hours at a time. That's what I'm doing with them.
Yeah, and it's funny because I feel that even you say that they were already seeing some MEV on Bitcoin emerge, and it's almost like the ecosystem is in denial that this is happening. I don't know if you get this sense, but the very first Bitcoin Season 2 episode we did, I had Walt from Cyberfund and Julian from Enduro come, and we just talked about it at a high level, like MEV on other chains. It's on Bitcoin now, and so now you guys are one of the first and prominent companies to raise on this topic. How much did you raise, and what's your sense on the landscape of Bitcoin MEV discussion?
Yeah, certainly. We raised 2.9 million for a seed round from some pretty interesting investors like 6MV, with Dudas, and they're great. Parafy, Moonrock, UTXO, and Arca. And I think all these investors really have had their eye on Bitcoin for a while. The way I see MEV is, there's not a ton of knowledge about it everywhere. It's not like you go MEV on Bitcoin and see the Ethereum equivalent. That's what makes it so exciting in a way. My mental, you know how you have the dark forest on Ethereum? Personally, I call it the dark swamp because it's even darker than the dark forest. You have some analogies to Ethereum MEV that you can see on Bitcoin, but I think there's also a lot of new behavior, and even new behavior that no one knows about, not even us. That's emerging because so much of this stuff on Bitcoin is less than a year old they're talking about. So I think, again, dark swamp, it's swampy, it's dark. I do have a lot to talk about. I'll kind of let you lead the way with how you want to peel back this onion.
Yeah. So I think one of the initial criticisms I get whenever I use this hand wavy term MEV is people ask what do you mean by MEV? What types of MEV are you talking about? Are you talking about power user driven MEV? Is this toxic? Is this in private order flow? When you guys are, I would imagine, still in the R&D phase, but what kind of MEV would you say you guys are seeing or directionally seeing on Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, the first obvious one is sniping, whether it's trades or mints. If you just spam a bunch of replaced by fees or RBFs, then hopefully one of those gets put before the transaction that you're trying to get ahead of. So if you have like a really hypey Ordinals collection, or like really hypey BRC20 mint, that's the most obvious one, and I think that's the one that like most people will say, okay, yeah, maybe there's a little MEV-esque behavior on Bitcoin. Personally, I think that's like the lowest common denominator of what we're going to see in the future, but it's the easiest thing to explain, right? I mean, with side chains, I think there's going to be like side chains, or even L2s. There's going to be a lot of things to unpack. I know Blockworks research uncovered like maybe last year even that with the Stacks sidechain, you had instances where there's a certain mining pool that was essentially like replacing transactions when people were trying to submit mining proof. I think it's what's it called, or like whatever rewards the Stacks tokens at the time. And I would argue that's an example of rather obscure MEV that no one really even noticed until it was noticed, right? I think an interesting bit that will require a fair bit of research is transaction censorship. Like, MEV is one thing when you can see stuff happening, but what if there's not something happening, an absence of something happening, which in case could be transaction censorship, or a block is left empty by a miner. So the parties involved, I mean, it could in some cases be miners. I think with all the DeFi, Bitcoin Fi, slow fi, whatever you want to call it, coming, we're about to see a lot more searchers coming into the space. And that's when I see the shadowy cabal / just like really smart people finding ways to extract value from simple transactions. So those are some examples I see now. And something else that I think will be one of the first new things to emerge in terms of something to look out for is arbitrage opportunities between the centralized exchanges and Bitcoin. Once you have any tokens being traded on a DEX on Bitcoin, also traded on a centralized exchange. So like I have some like Liquidium runes tokens because I think the protocol is cool, but I doubt they're going to be up on Coinbase too soon, unless they are, which would be awesome, but I doubt it, right? But considering like the Bitcoin mempool is 10 minutes long, there's a lag there. And I think that's going to get very interesting to see what behavior emerges when you have instant settlement on a centralized exchange versus 10-minute block times or 10-minute mempools.
Yeah, you introduced multiple topics there, and in particular, I think let's just zoom in on. I don't even know if you zoom in. This is a very broad topic. Bitcoin by just DeFi type behavior on Bitcoin assets, which are issued on Bitcoin and perhaps they're also tracked or they have a value settlement off chain. This is really interesting because when we try to imagine what MEV might look like on Bitcoin, one of the very obvious ones that I see is, well, structurally, Bitcoin has a 10-minute block time versus Ethereum's much, much faster one, and Solana and other blockchains much quicker block times. But on Bitcoin, you can have in between blocks on chain, you can have significant price movement for these on-chain traded assets. This is, I know that this can kind of happen on ETH, but this is pretty different when you look at how it might behave on Bitcoin. Could you give me some color to this and like, what does this structurally change the MEV or searcher strategies when we're looking at Bitcoin versus other chains?
I think maybe I like to joke sometimes that with a 10-minute block time, you could get MEV'd by hand. Like someone could literally just, be like executing transactions in terminal, like typing in everything, and they don't need to, no like C++ or Rust program necessary, right? But I think end of the day, like the behavior actually will be rather similar because it's essentially a race to the bottom, right? The moment competition arises, you're fighting with everyone. Based on two things, like one is time, which may or may not be something that really matters here, and then also, of course, with the value itself, like how much money and fees you're willing to throw at this until you have spent more and thus are not making a profit on the MEV you're performing. I think the latter here with the money and the value. The smarter people at Rebar will talk about the grim trigger mechanism, which I believe is the game theory proponent of like when it's a race to the bottom and everyone wants to put more money and fees, eventually you run out of places to go, right? You run out of space. There's no money left. But that's deep game theory stuff. You should totally get Alex or Alyssa from our team on if you ever want to talk about that insanely deep topic right there. But to that point, my answer is the time is really interesting, but the moment there's any competition at all, it becomes about numbers.
So the way you even begin to compete for these off-chain traded assets and Bitcoin's longer block time is you have to have pretty good data awareness of what the value of those assets are and where they exist, and then have to have arbitrage strategies. But that is all downstream of data awareness. To me, the best MEV begins at just procuring good state of these digital assets that aren't on Bitcoin. But you guys, and can you talk to me about that? I think you guys are working with oil a bit on this.
Yeah, we're tied with oil. I think I can't really share too much about our data strategy simply because this is stuff we're looking to launch after our first product, which we'll also talk about in this call. But you're right in that it feels like with all this new programmability on Bitcoin, like the Liquidium token, like I mentioned earlier. I wouldn't know off the top of my head, like what's an API I can ping to get a on-chain price, right? And then back to the 10-minute mempool, like how that would influence that. I can't tell you off the top of my head, but I bet you would have a difference there, right? Prices are moving slower, and that's where the R opportunity comes from. But something that we're interested in developing is tools in this regard to get people better data, whether it's really fast data for searchers, for people running arbitrage opportunities, or whether it's tools for people such as yourself to just observe these kinds of things happening on chain. I think, if you look at Ethereum, right, you can bust open Etherscan and you immediately can dive in and see what's happening. Bitcoin is very far from that. And I think we should ideally have a say and a place in changing that without saying too much. So, yeah, we're very, very interested in exploring that and showing the data better for everyone.
Yeah, that's interesting because if you consider what constitutes a Bitcoin block explorer, it's almost always just been limited to what is the current UTXO set look like and what is the transaction graph, what's in blocks. But I wrote on this for a Blockspace newsletter that the UI UX for the Bitcoin ecosystem is being whipped forward a bit by the introduction of Ordinals. I look specifically at like Ordiscan, which has basically not forked, but just recreated mempool.space's like UI, but added some awareness and some color as far as to like what runes exist in this transaction. And I think this is really interesting because you can see directionally where this is headed. I want to go back to BitFi or Bitcoin Fi and like look at these new things, which by the time this comes out, there might be significant like iteration on the conversation. But you have these things which post data to Bitcoin and index that data off chain according to their own rules. I look at the tap track ecosystem, I look at OpNet, I look at other types of like data blob, which turn those data blobs into smart contracts. And this is very interesting because I see MEV written all over this from a power user or a transaction inclusion block standpoint. Did you anticipate that type of thing happening when you launched Rebar? And then like, what do you think this looks like? Do you think these things actually proliferate MEV or power user behavior on Bitcoin? I don't know. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, a bit about like Rebar founding. So I actually joined with these fellas 2 months ago, pretty much. So I haven't been around since the very beginning, which I think was earlier this year, maybe February or so. And correct me if I'm wrong, didn't ordinal theory come about like early 2023? Like really early?
Yeah, basically launched in January.
Yeah. So I know some like the founders, like particularly our CTO, have been in the Bitcoin space for some time. And I think they saw the opportunity here of kind of like, Apple could always foresee what someone would need before they really needed it. I think they're going for that same angle of okay, there's clearly like people want to transact on Bitcoin and build this stuff on Bitcoin. Are we really early? Yes, absolutely. But I think it's good for us to get a head start and build this technology here, because some of the stuff we're making, like Rebar Shield, talk about later, is necessary on any chain that has MEV occurring. And like, what else was I thinking? Secondly, I think a good reason that Rebar has started this so early is that you need to essentially pitch this to all the miners and mining pools of Bitcoin to have any of our products really work, right? And particularly what I'm talking about, I don't think it's something that they could have decided like they're going to make in a month. We've been working behind the scenes, ever since earlier this year, and to that effect, I think it's fine to say, yeah, maybe we're really early, slightly too early, but feeling very comfy about it. In terms of like MEV proliferating, I have like a very simple belief here, which is if there's value to be extracted, someone's going to do it. You're going to have someone really smart. It can be from anywhere in the world across 7 billion people on Earth. And I think one of those people will find a way to extract value from the stuff happening on Bitcoin. It's only a matter of time.
Yeah. Before we talk about Rebar Shield, which I think is a wonderful product to launch with, it's more of a vanilla, like positive type of product to put out there. But you mentioned like the landscape of pools, or really the producers of blocks, being either the clients or they're key to being able to deliver MEV or MEV protection type products. What are your thoughts there? Like, I know there's a lot of people who have been trying to like work with mining pools and to try to get various mining pools to like participate in some of these strategies, but I don't think we've really seen very much, I would say, uncommon block production behavior. The only real example I think that we've seen is Marathon with their Slipstream product, and it just allows you to submit directly transactions which are not standard or not easily relayed to their mining node. But we haven't seen mining pools really embrace any active strategy for more sophisticated like MEV techniques. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah.
Do you think pools are open to this? And yeah, how do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Marathon stuff is cool. I myself a non-standard transaction, but I still think it's early for the bigger mining pools to really embrace that. As I said before, a lot of the MEV we have is simple arbitrage or sniping, or spamming RBFs. But it is very likely that as you build more cool stuff on Bitcoin, there does come a need for non-standard transactions. We're going to want to have mining pools run that. So for me, that's kind of a TBD. However, one reason why I'm generally bullish and confident that these pools would be into doing that more is simply the fact that block rewards continue to decrease. And it generally looks like the trend is that block rewards will continue to decrease. And if you have searchers who want to execute non-standard transactions and will pay higher fees or do something like a tip, or an incentive for that, mining pools can become really interested in that potentially. Again, I can't speak for the mining pools. I'm just acting off conjecture here. But if we have enough volume happening on Bitcoin with these activities, we have enough searchers running transactions that would tip or pay a higher fee to these mining pools, that essentially becomes really, really appealing, I think, to those entities.
So if for the listener who's made it, say 20 minutes into this and their heart's beating fast and they're scared because they look at you and they hear this term, MEV, and they're just trying to trade their goddamn JPEGs, they get scared. But this leads into, I think, one of them, the specific product that you guys are building right now, which is Rebar Shield. I think this is more like the white knight approach to building out MEV tooling. Can you describe what this is? Can you describe like how this works?
Yeah, absolutely. I love your introduction there, by the way. Yeah, it's all going to be okay. Your ordinals and ruins of BRC20s are going to be just fine. So Rebar Shield is our first product at Rebar Labs that we're releasing, and we probably will have announced it by the time this goes out. And we just have some final work in the background to finish before it goes live. But the way it works is it's very simple to flash bots protect, but for Bitcoin, if the listener is familiar with that product. The way it works is that functionally you submit a transaction on Bitcoin via an RPC endpoint, just like you normally would. But that's forwarded to Rebar, to mining pools that are running the Rebar client, and that puts your transaction into a private mempool rather than the public mempool. So we call it Shield because you're avoiding all these scary MEV things we just talked about by having your transaction sit in a private mining pool, a private mempool that's not rebroadcast across all of the mining pools. Then from there, it gets included into a block, and of course, it's public again. So when you say the word private, it's not like Monero type stuff, but we're just skipping the transaction sitting in the public mempool for 10 full minutes.
Yeah, this is just so user can pay a modest fee to basically guarantee that transaction only goes to towards their original end, so it's not going to get swapped out by someone else. Yeah,
exactly. It's hidden from the prying eyes of the searchers, and we've seen this with flashbots on Ethereum, and it's incredibly popular. Like even I have used their RPC if I'm kind of feeling the weird tingle in my spine about a Uniswap trade I'm about to do, because we all know like what MEV exists on Ethereum. So I think this product is going to be really vital as MEV emerges on Bitcoin.
So this is kind of like it's like a protected private order flow product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, private order flow is another way you can put it, and that's exactly what it is.
What does this look like? Who are the clients of this private order flow? I know you mentioned, like, intuitively I can understand maybe wallets like an Xverse or Unisat saying, click this little checkbox, your transaction will get sniped, and underneath it's Rebar Labs all the way down. What do you think this might look like for the end user?
I mean, ideally, it looks a lot like what you just said, because that's what we imagine it to be like. And we have been in talks with a lot of these major wallet providers for exactly that. We want to get it perfect on the infrastructure side before that, but essentially the value add is quite literally that. We even have a small little Shield logo we're working on, should they want to include that as well. So really easy, for the users. Kind of talk about different parties could be interested here too. We're interested in like how searchers would want to use this as well. Because searchers like on Solana are using Jito, searchers on Ethereum like to use Flashbots, and we want to be that same person for searchers. And also, I'd like to just have a reminder here. I'd like to talk about like why we're so interested in searchers and talking about them in a second. So I make it clear we have a philosophy here that's important. But we'll get to that later. But effectively, I think searchers would find our product valuable. The last thing is that it would get especially interesting for them if bundles can be figured out on Bitcoin. Can
you explain to the listener, like if someone has made it this far, they might know the mempool, they might know private mempool. Can you explain transaction bundles?
Yeah, bundles are just submitting a number of transactions at once and essentially having a guarantee that these transactions all execute in a certain order. And with Bitcoin, it's tougher because on Bitcoin, you can't quite order transactions as deterministically in a block. You can make your best effort at it, but essentially like bundles aren't as valuable so far if you can't deterministically order blocks so easily. I do have money bet personally in my head that will change. Again, like for example, sandwich attacks, should people are familiar with sandwich attacks, function on the nature that you're able to exactly arrange transactions how you want to. And the way Bitcoin works in arranging transactions, you have like parent-child transactions, fee, timing, and then like a bunch of randomness kind of thrown in there, right? So sandwich transactions probably aren't really going to be profitable in that paradigm because you have a certain percentage chance what's going to happen in there. But the moment someone figures out how to actually order blocks how you want, bundles can become really intriguing for searchers. And that's something that you use Rebar's technology for.
It's really interesting because right now all the rage over in ETH land is the modularity idea. And we've split apart proposers and builders. And what you are describing feels like Bitcoin's already had PBS in its own way. We just haven't actually utilized it. I heard, I think on the Gort podcast, someone say that Bitcoin was modular before it was cool. What are your thoughts about this? Do you see analogies between proposer builder separation and this type of like transaction flow that you're talking about on Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, I argue there already is proposer builder separation because you have some mining pools that are acting as template processors, and then some are just, handing off the template creation processing to these larger pools, especially ones with smaller levels of hash rate. I mean, so yeah, I'd argue it's already here. I think Stratum v2 essentially made that possible and easy to do.
So you said you wanted to talk about your philosophy, and I think this is really important here because there's a bunch of different like views on MEV, discrete types of MEV, MEV being good and bad, and then I think Kyle Samani's view that a blockchain's value is the total value of MEV that can be extracted from it. Where does Rebar come from on this topic as a company building one of the first types of products in this space?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've heard my tone on this so far. It's been a bit of a nihilist almost, where I say like value extraction is inevitable. It's going to happen. It'll find a way. There could be someone in like Andorra who will figure it out and do it from their laptop.
Get sandwiched by a Cambodian. Yeah.
Yeah, anywhere in the world, right? And essentially our philosophy here is that we want to work with these kind of searchers, like these searcher teams, these folks finding out these strategies, because we believe that like anyone can and will figure this out. Anyone will support that to make it fair and open and transparent and shared with the Bitcoin ecosystem so that everyone knows how to address it, rather than it being like a secret cabal thing that is happening, extracting values from users. Like worst case scenario would be that this is happening, extracting value from users, and no one knows how to even quantify it or research it or, express data on it, which speaks to why we're really into the MEV protection product, the data products we're working on to talk about this. But lastly, we just want to actually research this stuff and meet the searchers who are figuring out how Bitcoin works and what value can be extracted. And our kind of thing we give in return is tailoring some tools, Rebar Shield, to help them do whatever strategies they might want to do, as long as we can agree to have a fair ecosystem and not secret shadowy people extracting out the value. So if you're a searcher listening to us, go on our website and click contact top right and say hi.
This is interesting because a lot of what I've said since the beginning has been in the post Ordinals world. I would say in Bitcoin season 2, we as Bitcoiners can learn a lot from what's happened in the Ethereum and other crypto ecosystems. And one of my questions, it's been a bit of an existential question, has been, well, as far as MEV in these other crypto economic ecosystems, we've discovered what doesn't work to mitigate it. We've discovered, I don't know if we've discovered any positives. We've just figured out how to play the cat and mouse game a little bit differently. And maybe, and I'm speaking out loud, I'm just kind of speaking off the cuff here, maybe there is just all that we've learned is that the ecosystem growth is very path dependent. Maybe what we've learned is that if we have foreknowledge about how the MEV games play out, we can direct them to end up in a more positive direction. Does this resonate with you at all? Because this seems to be a little bit like what you're describing.
Yeah, definitely. I think, once again, I'll say MEV will happen, nihilism, it's all going to happen. But sometimes it uncovers good things and, teaches you how to make a network better and how to perform in adversity. I think one example is Ethereum used to do kind of random transaction ordering in a block. And to get around that, you could do spamming. Same way you see with spamming to snipe ordinals mints. And then spamming is bad. Spamming increases fees in a network. So then Ethereum introduced transaction ordering by fees, which naturally it leads to another wormhole with MEV, but it's more transparent. and ultimately it's harming everyone on the network a bit less because there's less spam on the network. So something like that says like MEV doesn't always have to be the worst thing in the world. It can reveal like something that would have happened anyways that was bad, and then steps can be taken to address it. I think what's also cool about MEV on Bitcoin and how new it is and everything is we've seen like MEV play out on Ethereum for 5-6 years, like ever since the Flash Blues 2.0 paper by Flashbots and maybe a couple years before that. And effectively you see all the game theory stuff play out, like all the fee wars and people getting down to the tiny last bits of value extracted. And it's almost like a history book we can study as we build or MEV come into Bitcoin. So I think that's really interesting and there's something to think about to that question.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I look at, and I'm just using the most recent example of this on Solana. They solved their DDoS issues or their like transaction spam issues by just introducing a simple hierarchical user system. The more you got staked, the more valuable you are. You're a more meaningful user. So
yeah.
I view that as like very much that is a very clear design decision for that blockchain, which I don't think has really been appreciated by most of the end users.
I've definitely been appreciating it because the transaction will actually happen now, which is awesome. And yeah, I mean, for a while there on Solana, people like you would look at a Python or Node script, and it would just be like a loop to fire off a transaction over and over again, until it gets picked up. And I think that's one reason why like Solana, I think, is powerful, is it's gone through like so much pain, and had to like deal with so many issues that they figured out a lot of solutions as a result. So, back to MEV, I'm kind of like sometimes being a great network involves a little pain along the way. That's okay.
I'm I share a bit of your nihilism that it's inevitable, but it's also that I also kind of like, I mean, I've been in Bitcoin a long time, and my view on price, because people always ask me like what the price is going to be. I'm like, well, I think Bitcoin will be $1 million, $10 million someday, but it's going to take the most painful path imaginable to get there. And empirically, that has been the case.
Yep.
So, one thing that I see, and it's a trend, because I check in on the discussion on ETH consensus and where does ETH go from here. It feels there's a bit of disillusionment in the ecosystem right now. I, as a Bitcoiner, can relate to this a lot, given our history. But I've seen some of like the really, really sharp people who are on the absolute tip of the spear of how do you create a comparatively fair blockchain, talk about how maybe even like reflect publicly that proof of work may actually be a very important component to building a fair and open system, which makes me, I look at how Bitcoin's currently pretty unexpressive design works and the way that proof of work backends the probabilistic nature of block production. This is a pretty big question. Feel free to take it anywhere you want. Do you think proof of work and Bitcoin's natural design makes it more resistant to toxic MEV over the existing proof of stake systems out there?
No, I think like proof of work, proof of stake, whatever, it's all abstracted away from mechanisms of decentralized finance. Like you're gonna have the same incentive structures. Like if you look at Ethereum, it kind of looks like the same game is going on over there, whether it was proof of work, proof of stake. Maybe there's smaller details below this, and I'll just admit ignorance there. But from a high level, I kind of still see like the same concepts playing out, no matter what's going on underneath.
I appreciate that answer. That's a really interesting answer. I try not to be blinded by my own proof of work maximalism, but yeah, this is a really interesting discussion. So, do you think the existing searcher class, primarily on ETH, do you think that they're well positioned to excel on Bitcoin, or do you think that the future of Bitcoin MEV searchers requires a different skill set?
I think they're probably excelled for Bitcoin, especially once there's like enough volume to make it worth it for whatever size team they are. Like even I can see like small teams or solo operations probably doing things right now, I would guess. I've also talked to a couple teams already who are, established teams that I don't want to name names, but are probably known to people and are certainly interested in keeping an eye on this. You can honestly even argue that they might fare better off because there'd be less competition on Bitcoin. They might have to like bring someone on board who really understands how the chain works and the UTXO model and everything. But beyond that, I just think less competition will make it night and day compared to Ethereum, which has been, I'm trying to think of a good word here. The MEV environment, it kind of probably looks like my local supermarket in March 2020. All the toilet paper is gone,
Yeah, that's a really good analogy.
Mm-hmm.
Just some other like non sequitur topics. Like, when I look at I'm not familiar with like the capital requirements for MEV for ETH searchers. Like in order to conduct, I see like a tweet from like of that like Jared from Subway spent like $100 million to get like $50 in margin. That is a huge capital requirement. Maybe there's some flash loans under the hood that I'm not aware of or something, but like, this can require deep pockets to like arbitrage these off-chain assets with the on-chain behavior. Is this a meta or an important ingredient, do you think, for
Yeah.
searchers?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, like if transactions like the Jared from Subway one, I feel like definitely a flash loan involved there. And I know I was asking some folks in Nashville at protocols are kind of dipping into the Aave area. I'm like, do you ever do flash loans if you could, kind of thing. But going back to bundles, it'd be really helpful to have bundles where you obviously want to be able to arrange your transactions in a certain guaranteed order, lest your flash loan be not so flashy in that case. So that's that effect. I think people are definitely probably working on that very situation right now. In terms of capital requirements for not using flash loans, I mean, I've always kind of seen like a sliding scale for these on-chain things. You have some strategies that don't scale well, and you can make like a higher percentage return, but scales less well. So you can use not so much capital. And then there's things that scale really well, but give a lower percent return. That's for like the people with, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. This effect with Bitcoin, I think it's going to ultimately just end up like your typical trading shop strategies. I think, again, it's all abstracted away at a certain point, but some tools need to be built for it to be possible on Bitcoin, like the bundles, to really take advantage of it.
So it feels to me that, again, the big barrier here is just getting a pool to cooperate. Like that's kind of the holy grail. So until a slipstream either at Mara or at another pool, another type of private mempool of these pools comes out, that is probably like the ecosystem pretty much looks like just kind of power users extracting ordinals sniping mints. Do you, and feel free not to answer here, do you think this will happen in 2024? Do you think we'll see direct pool partnerships this year?
I'm going to say, don't hold me to this, because the one thing I'll say about pools is, they're careful, right? Like in our discussions with all of them, they move a bit slow, and I think for a very good reason. They shouldn't listen to any willy-nilly company that says we're going to change their lives, right? That being said, if you're just talking about like vibes alone, and don't hold me to this, I'm not even speaking on Rebar's behalf here. I'm just saying my personal vibes.
Yeah,
answer would be yes.
Spicy. I mean, it's funny because like I thought I worked for a pool over the past year. I thought for sure, yeah, of course, obvious. There's a giant carrot dangling, and for a number of reasons, I've seen there's not a lot of actual execution on this.
Yeah, well, also it doesn't have to be. I'm not really saying yes to something that's like they're making block templates or they're, God forbid, rearranging transactions or something like that. I'm saying something as simple as like accepting a transaction from a private mempool.
Yeah.
Really simple and like not really them doing anything else than that. So I want to make it clear when I say yes, it's not like changing the fabric of the mining pools or how Bitcoin works. The only thing like Rebar really focused on right now is the mempool and offering a private order flow solution for that.
The other thing that I think is probably very different, which is structurally different about Bitcoin, is the way that templates are passed back and forth between the pools and the actual machines mining with the pools.
Mm-hmm.
This is an interesting area, and I'm not sure how many people have thought about the implications on private mempools, because are you familiar at all with spy mining, where you point your ASICs, your rigs, to a competitive mining pool, and you get to see what templates they're passing you? This is a way to circumvent the privacy of that mempool, in that they would have to, this introduces another vector, which I think is very fascinating, into the private mempool games. But this has to be executed by the actual data center operator themselves. And the data center operators, in my experience, are on the absolute least sophisticated, and on the totem pole of sophistication, least sophisticated about like the MEV games. So I don't know. Is this a new concept, or have you thought about this? This is a total curveball that I'm throwing at you.
No, actually, I saw like an article on the shared in our Slack, and then I gave it like a read over, but I was like busy with something, so I didn't quite reach deep into it. But thank you for that nice and succinct explanation, because that is crazy. I can't comment on it personally, but like we do keep an eye on stuff like that. I'll definitely be looking into it. I might honestly even like poke some of my colleagues, the smarter ones than me, and ask them for their opinion on it. So you got my curiosity picked as well.
Yeah. What topics have we not covered that you think would be interesting for this conversation? Given that, like I feel like we could have this type of conversation every 3 months for the next 2 years, and each one would look very, very different. What topics do you think would be interesting to like have summer of 2024, August, interesting to have on the record?
Yeah. I mean, I think like I think there's a very solid chance that whatever meta protocol, let's say programmability on Bitcoin is a huge thing in 2026. I think there's a solid chance that whatever meta protocol, like the ERC20 of Bitcoin, the ERC721 of Bitcoin, right? I think there's a very solid chance that that doesn't even exist yet. It could come out like early next year. Like I think we're so early and it's such a wild west that we could absolutely do this. Like every 3 or 4 months, you just check in and see what we've learned. Like even like things like OpNet right now are kind of popping up and doing stuff. Like of that, I think things are going to change very quickly, and that's why like so much of what I'm kind of saying is like it's a dark swamp. Swamp is dark, humid. Things are changing. I'm seeing like pairs of glowing eyes in the undergrowth. And it's awesome. That's something that really drew me to like Bitcoin. Was there's a lot of cool stuff happening, and it's kind of like a Wild West vibe. People are figuring things out.
It's a blue ocean, and it's a swamp, and it's a dark forest. It's all of those things at the same time.
I think that exists in Louisiana or Mississippi somewhere. All 3 of those things at once.
Exactly. It's swampy Bitcoin. Devin, I really appreciate you hopping on here and talking through this with me. I think this is the type of thing where I just want to have I want to have the first conversations on these topics until they get too high level and too specific and too difficult for me, too arcane to understand. Then I'll just hand off the baton to a much more technical quant type podcast interviewer. But thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to keeping in touch with what Rebar is doing, and perhaps someday sending my own Ordinals purchases through Rebar Shield.
That'd be wonderful. Yeah, and thank you so much for having me on. This is fun. It was great to talk about what we're doing, and I'm very excited to keep reporting on what we see go down on Bitcoin.
Cool. Talk to you later.
All right. Bye. Thank you.